of what the world will look like if human beings treated one another as Jesus calls us to do, to love our neighbors, we love ourselves. I do want to say, Lavon and my kids and my granddaughter are here somewhere. I think I saw them up top here, but anyway, they're there, back in the back. And so I hope you have a chance to meet them. And if Stella's around, and if she, at the end, would come down, maybe she can say hello to everybody. No? Okay, maybe she's in the kids' camp. All right. So anyway, I am thrilled that you were here. This is going to be a lot of fun, this journey. And I thought I might begin with a pop quiz. So you received that as you walked in. And what I'd like to do is invite you to turn to 3 or 4 other people, 2 or 3 other people, find out their names, and you have 3 minutes to answer as many of these questions as you can. And so, all right, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, you have 3 minutes. When you finish it, hold it up so I know. But be sure to move it around so you can cover the questions.
I did the ones I knew.
All right, you just have 1 minute, you have 2 minutes left.
There's one you're supposed to get 2, and I wasn't sure the one was right.
You should be halfway done by now. All right, you've got 60 seconds. Anybody finished with it already? All right, a few of you. Very good. We'll see in a minute if you got them right. Eight, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, what year was Jesus born? 3 or 4 BC is the accurate, is at least as best as we can tell the correct answer. Our calendars are off, and we learned that Jesus was born during the reign of King Herod the Great, and King Herod the Great died, we think, in 4 BC, possibly 3 BC. Some people want to say 2 BC, and some would say 1 CE, but more likely 4 or 3 BC, Jesus was born. So our dating of Jesus, he was born before Christ. Interesting enough. All right. Who was the king of Judea when Jesus was born? Herod. All right, which Herod? The Great. Okay, very good. What was the name of the village where Jesus was born? Good. Okay, you're doing good. What was the town where Jesus grew up? Are you grading yourself? Okay, all right. What river was Jesus baptized in? Okay. How old was Jesus when he began his public ministry? Which gospel tells us that? Luke. Luke tells us that. All right. How long was Jesus active in ministry before he was crucified? Maybe. Unless you're reading the Gospel of John, and then maybe it was 18 months or so. We're really not sure, but the synoptics would seem to look like three years. What was Jesus' hometown during his 3 years of public ministry? Very good. What was the Capernaum? In case you didn't hear that, what was the primary focus of Jesus' preaching in 4 words? The kingdom of God. That's it. So, in particular, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke's Gospels, a little less so in John's Gospel. Yep. Name one of the primary reasons the religious leaders dislike Jesus. You don't have to. Actually, you can say them out loud on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Right. Exactly. So here's at least 4 of mine. He challenged their interpretation of Scripture when it came to Sabbath, when it came to cleanliness, and a whole host of other laws. He was popular among the ordinary people, and they were jealous. One of the Gospels tells us they were jealous. He forgave sinners and associated with sinful people. And so that's actually kind of 2 answers. And he called out their hypocrisy. So woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, you hypocrites. All right, and there's others that you could give, but those would be, if you had any of those 4, I'm going to count that as an okay. By the way, we're giving away a free cruise if they get all these right? No, that's not out. Sorry. All right, so Jesus' primary invitation to people was 3 words. Come follow me. Yep, come follow me. All right, what 2 groups of people did Jesus primarily associate with? Sinners and tax collectors, or sinners and lost people? We could probably say it that way. All right, what was the primary type of miracles Jesus worked? Healing, physical healing. Name 2 virtues Jesus called his disciples to practice on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Right, exactly. So love, forgiveness, humility, compassion, love of God, and there's a whole bunch more. But that if you had any of those, you're on the right track. What did Jesus say were the 2 most important commandments? Very good. Love God and love your neighbor. And then he said a 3rd one also summarized the law and the prophets, and that was do unto others as you would have them do unto you. All right. So in that, but he doesn't say that's one of the 2 most important commandments. He just says it summarizes the law and the prophets. But the law and the prophets, but the 2 most important commandments: love God with all your being and love your neighbors yourself. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what does Jesus pray just before he was arrested? Okay, I couldn't hear what you said, but take this cup from me, yet not my will, but thy will be done. In the Garden of Gethsemane. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what did Jesus pray just before, and I'm sorry, in Matthew and Mark only, what did Jesus pray just before he died while he was on the cross? No, that's Luke. In Matthew and Mark, he prayed, and this is the only thing that we hear he said in Matthew and Mark's Gospels, my God, why have you forsaken me? Yeah. And who prayed that first? King David prayed that first in Psalm 22. Very good. You get extra credit for that one. All right. And let's see. How many full days was Jesus in the tomb? Yeah. 1.5 days, right? Yeah, it's just a little over that. So we say 3 days because in the Jewish way of keeping time, sunset begins a new day. So he was crucified on Friday and buried Friday before the Sabbath began on Friday night. So Friday, Saturday, and he was resurrected on Sunday, which was the beginning of the 3rd day. Actually, the 3rd day began Saturday evening. So 3 days, but it was literally a day and about 14 hours. All right. Okay, so how'd you do? How many of you got all of them right? A few of you did. Okay. Well, some of you are preachers and some of you are just good liars. But that's... I'm just kidding. I'm just teasing. Okay, let's take a look at where we are and where we're going. All right, so this map, if you can give me the map, there we go. So we started off from Athens, and last night we were coming through the islands over here, and I think we're somewhere over here. My GPS didn't show for sure today, but we're somewhere in this vicinity on the south side of Turkey. Let me just remind you, this is Turkey over here. This is Greece, where we began. This is Italy, the boot of Italy over here. This is Iran. This is Iraq. This is the cradle of civilization here with the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. There's where Abraham got his start, ended up moving to Haran, and finally made his way to the land of Canaan. This is Syria. This is Saudi Arabia. This is Jordan here. And there's little Israel is right in here. Actually, it comes all the way down here. So, and then we have Egypt, where we're going to be going later on, and the Sinai. Let me just back all that out, and I want to show you. Well, actually, I think the next one shows you where we're going. So we started in Athens, made our way down here. We're on our way to the port of Haifa and Capernaum. Then we're going to make our way down to the port at Ashdod, and we're going to go to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Then we're making our way to Alexandria, and we're going to take buses down to Cairo, see the pyramids. We're going to come back and spend a day in Alexandria after that, and then we're going to make our way back over here to Athens, and we're going to visit Corinth and Athens. So that's the journey that we're on. Oh, I'm sorry. No, yeah, we're going to Ephesus first. Yeah. All right, let's make sure we get an Ephesus, and then we're coming across here. Thank you so much. That's exactly right. All right, so that's where we're going during this journey, and again, we're somewhere over here right now. All right, so I want to walk you through. Actually, I want to walk you through the Holy Land because that's where we're heading first. Let's get past these, and so looking at the Holy Land. Let's go to the next one. Here we go. So what I'd like you to do is take your pop quiz. I'd like you to fold it in half, and I would like for you to draw Israel on the top of the back page, all right? So if you have a pen and paper, and I'm going to help you with this. This, of course, is the Mediterranean Sea. I want you to start with this little body of water up here, and that is the Sea of Galilee. Then I'm going to have you draw down towards the bottom, and this isn't all of Israel. This is just a portion of it, but it captures most of it, and certainly the places in Jesus' life. I want you to draw the Dead Sea down below. Then I want you to draw the Jordan River that connects the two. All right? Then I'm going to have you put Capernaum up at the top. That's where we're going tomorrow on the Sea of Galilee. If you want to, come down from Capernaum, down this way, to Nazareth, and then Jerusalem down here, and Bethlehem. And you can kind of tee Jerusalem and Bethlehem off of the Sea of or the Dead Sea over here, so you can kind of come off that direction. All right, I'm going to show you the red line here represents the Palestinian West Bank territories over here. And this area is roughly the same as Samaria in the time of Jesus. Let's see, I don't have one more map of that, so I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to stop, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to come back over here and clear that out. And, okay, so I want you to recognize there's about 4 areas in the Holy Land that are important for you to remember in the time of Jesus. One is that in this area to the north, it's the Galilee. So we have the Sea of Galilee, after which the rest of this is named, but the Galilee. In the center of the country, we have Samaria. And to the south, we have Judea. All of this is controlled by the Romans in the time of Jesus. There's also an area over here. This is Perea over here. And this is called the Decapolis, right over here. And so all of this at one time was ruled by King Herod the Great, but during the lifetime of Jesus, after Herod died, it was divided up and it was ruled over in part by a couple of his sons and in part by Rome itself, with Pontius Pilate at the time of Jesus' death having control over the southern portion of this. In the center, there's mountains. So if we were to take a bus, can you bring me down just a smidge in volume? The center of the country is mountains. If we were to take you straight through the center, and I have done this many times, you're going to go over 2 or 3 mountain ranges right in the middle of the country. Towards the sea, so let's go over this way. Towards the sea, you have the plains over here. You can also see that all of this is much greener than this. This is the wilderness of Judea here. It's desert. So when we say wilderness in the Bible, we really mean desert. And again, there's the Jordan River flowing down here. So a variety of topography here. This is a plain up through here, and this is the valley, at least partly the valley where Megiddo is. And of course, we know that the word valley, Har, Megiddo, Armageddon. And so when we think about the book of Revelation says the great battle in the last time between the forces of good and evil is going to happen somewhere in this vicinity. I take that more metaphorically than I take it literally, but some people take it quite literally. All right, so this area, all of this is much more lush. This area becomes much more desert-like. Jerusalem and Bethlehem are right on the edge of the Judean wilderness or desert. All right, so you've got at least an outline of what the biblical lands look like if you hold on to that map. You've heard this before. If you've ever been to the Holy Land, you've certainly heard it, that there are many people who describe the Holy Land as the fifth gospel. And the power of this is that when you walk there, you are walking into the biblical story. This is part of the beauty, part of the amazing experience of stepping into these narratives that we're reading in Scripture. And all of a sudden, so for me, there are times, the first time I went to the Holy Land, I didn't have to lead anything. And Levon kept asking me, are you sick? Are you okay? You're not talking. And I'm like, I am just astounded, actually. So I've seen these places in pictures, but there's something about being there. And I don't know if this has happened for you, but sometimes over the course of a long time of having faith, the stories seem to be like stories. They feel a little mythical and fairy tale-like. And then all of a sudden you show up and you find out there's actually a Capernaum. And there's a synagogue in Capernaum. And there's a house in Capernaum where Simon and Andrew lived that the church remembered from very early in its history. And you go to Jerusalem and you find, there's the old city of Jerusalem, but you also find, this church that marks a place where Jesus is said to have died. And you walk through the Kidron Valley and you go down the Mount of Olives, and all of a sudden you see all of this stuff is real. And it somehow leads you to read the story differently. You see it differently. You hear it differently when you're reading it. So it's the fifth gospel in the sense that it opens up the gospels for us to see it and understand it in more powerful ways. When you're in the Holy Land, you're going to see things in a way you hadn't seen it before. You're going to read the scriptures in a way you hadn't read them before. You're going to hear the gospel in a way you hadn't heard it before. Now, some people go to the Holy Land. This ship, you've got a whole bunch of people. I'm guessing a lot of these people are like, I'm interested in going to the Holy Land. I'm not a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, but I'm interested in going. And you can go and do sightseeing there. And it's fascinating. You're talking about a half of the world's population consider this their Holy Land, and between Muslims, Jews, and Christians. And you can see the history of that land where the great empires of the world controlled this little piece of property. In fact, I'm going to go backwards just a little bit. And let's see. Go back this way. So all of the empires ended up, so the empires from the northeast came down this way. They all made their way through this land. If they were coming from Europe, they made their way through this land. If they were coming from Egypt, they made their way through. This would be like the Suez Canal of the ancient world. So all the trade routes passed in this direction. Controlling it was very important. So even though Israel was a tiny little, small country, it was sought after by many countries because they could control the trade routes that linked Africa to Europe and Asia. So a very fascinating place. If you want to go as a tour, as a tourist, just to see it with no spiritual interest at all, it's fascinating. But if you go with your heart open and you go trying to understand Christianity, at least we go, most of us as Christians, if you go trying to understand the Christian faith, you're going to see things, experience things in ways maybe you never anticipated before. All right, so I want to jump into the places that we're going to visit, and I want to start by taking us to, so we're going to go back to the Holy Land again, and this is the Roman Empire in the time of Jesus. You can see that the Holy Land was just a very small little part of the Roman Empire at this time. This gives you a chance to see these areas I talked about: Samaria, Judea, Decapolis, Perea, and then some of the areas surrounding them. So I want to take you to Bethlehem. So we're going to see Capernaum first, but I want to start with Jesus chronologically. If I were taking you on a land-based trip to the Holy Land, we would start in Bethlehem. So we start with the birth of Jesus, and then we make our way to the north, to the Galilee, to see the life of Jesus, and we come back to Jerusalem to see the death and resurrection of Christ. So I want to take you to Bethlehem, and I'm going to take you first to the shepherds' fields and the shepherds' homes. So when you think about the birth of Jesus, this is taking place in Bethlehem. Bethlehem was the city that the first time we read about it is the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. Actually, before that, we read about it in Genesis because Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife, dies near Bethlehem. And she's buried there, and there's a mosque, actually it was a mosque, now it's a synagogue, just outside of Bethlehem that marks her death, Jacob's favorite wife. And then we find some of the judges were from there, but then ultimately we end up finding out about Ruth. And Ruth and Naomi, and you'll remember that Ruth was a Moabitess. She's from Moab, the other side of the Dead Sea. And Ruth is faithful to her mother-in-law and Naomi, even after Naomi's husband dies and her two sons die. And she commits to staying with Naomi in Bethlehem, even though she's not from Bethlehem herself. Ruth is not from Bethlehem. Ruth ends up snagging a husband on, what was it, Bumble or something, I can't remember, but she was using one of the dating apps, and she snagged herself a husband, and his name was Boaz, and was it Boaz or Obed? Boaz. She ended up getting remarried to Boaz, and she had a son named Obed, and Obed had a son named Jesse, and Jesse had a son named David. And so the story of Ruth is a beautiful short story in the Old Testament, but it's linking up or teeing up the idea that David is going to be born there. It's a little town of nothing. I mean, there's like maybe 100 people who live in this town. It's a very small town. Bethlehem means house of bread. They probably, well, we know in Ruth's time that they were growing barley there. They were making bread there. But David is a shepherd, and he's the youngest of Jesse's sons, either the seventh or eighth son of Jesse. And so it becomes known as when David becomes anointed as king, it becomes known as the city of David. Jerusalem later is the city of David. He conquers the city of Jerusalem to the city of David. So later on, Micah comes along, and this is several hundred years after the time of David, and he says, out of Bethlehem will come a king whose origins are of old. And so we have Bethlehem linked to the birth of a messianic king, a promised king. And when Jesus is born in Bethlehem, you may remember what was happening. The emperor was Augustus at this time, and he commanded a census, and Mary and Joseph had to return to Joseph's ancestral home. His family is from Bethlehem, and he returns there, and she gives birth while she's there. Now I want to show you what you see on the screen is a peasant's home, a typical first century home in the area of Palestine. And I want you to notice that as you walk in, the front door is at the top, and as you walk in the front door, you come to a kitchen and dining or common space. You'll go through another entryway, another doorway to the bottom right, and you'll see the sleeping quarters. So the family would sleep together in these quarters. And if they were fortunate, they had an upstairs, and that upstairs was called in Greek a kataluma, which was the upper guest room. And then if you went underneath the house, you would come to the stable. Stables were not built of wood, and they weren't barns. They were built they were actually caves. And in this part of the country, there's very few trees, but there's a lot of caves. So I want to show you, you're going to see the shepherd's fields in Bethlehem, and you'll notice these naturally occurring caves in these areas here, and they're all over the place out there. So if you have sheep, what you want to do is at night, to keep them from wandering off or to keep them from getting eaten, you bring them into one of these caves. And ideally, if you're going to be stationary and actually build a house and not just have a tent, you're going to build a house on top of it, so you've got a built-in basement. That basement is your barn. So in the story, as we find it in the Gospel of Luke, we find that Mary and Joseph show up in Bethlehem, and there's no room, not at the Holiday Inn. There's no room because there's no inn probably in Bethlehem. There's no room in the kataluma, in the guest room, the upper room. There's no room there because all of the families come back to Bethlehem because of the census. And so the families gathered in there. There's probably 12 people sleeping in that upper room. And so where are they going to put the Holy Family, Mary and Joseph, so she can have a baby and not make the whole house unclean by bodily fluids, which make it unclean when you're giving birth? Well, they're going to go to the basement. They're going to go to the place where the animals are. And you're going to see that when we're in Jerusalem. I want you to see this when we're in Bethlehem. I want you to see these are shepherds' homes in Bethlehem. There are people or outside of Bethlehem. There are shepherds who have made a good living at this, but most of the shepherds that I've met in the Holy Land have a few sheep, 8 or 9 sheep. They're typically pretty uneducated, and they live in pretty simple and humble abodes like this. This is another shepherd's house here, and this is just outside of Bethlehem. And when I came upon this, I thought I have to take a picture of this. You can see the caves here, and a cave here that they built around, and other caves over here. And so you bring your animals in at night, or in this case, they've also built a sort of barn here. But you can see a very simple house, and you get a picture, because when you go to Bethlehem, you're going to go into a church. It's a beautiful church. It was built, it's the longest continuously used church in the world. It was built first in the 300s. Let me just remind you, Christianity was illegal to begin with, and then when it became legal, Constantine, the emperor, allowed his mother to go to the Holy Land and provide funds to build beautiful churches there, marking the sites of Jesus. But long before she built the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem in the 300s, Christians had been going there, starting in at least the early 100s, and had been going to a cave. And when they went to that cave, they remembered that Jesus was born here. This was the stable in which Jesus was born. I want us to think together about this for a moment, but I want to show you the Church of the Nativity. So this is the Holy Shrine in Jerusalem. You've maybe seen this on television. This is Manger Square, and this is where people gather on Christmas Eve, on the Orthodox Christmas Eve, and celebrate the birth of Christ. We're going to go in through this door right over here, and you'll hear more about what that door means when we're there. And this is what you're going to see inside. The church has been being restored for some time, and the holiest shrine is almost always underneath the altar. The altar is up here, and so you're going to walk around, and you're going to go downstairs. You're going to go down into the cave, into the stable. It's a beautiful building. It was first built in the 300s. It was burned down and rebuilt in the 500s. So this is as you're heading down the steps. I'm just trying to prepare you for what you're going to be seeing and doing. As you're heading down the steps, it's going to be very crowded. There's going to be a lot of people there. And as we go in, you're going to find this is the cave. Now you say it doesn't really look like much of a cave, or it's kind of strange. You've got old ancient tapestries that are pretty much disintegrated. You've got icons on the walls. And what I'm going to invite you to do is to go back into this cave area first. Go back in there and just try to take it in. If you can stand back there, because otherwise they're going to push you quick in and out. But I want you to go back there, and I want you to pause for a moment. I want you to think, what might have happened in this space? Maybe it wasn't that cave. Maybe it's the one next door where the Catholics had built a church over it. But I want you to pause and think about, what is the significance of this place? When you're in there, you're going to see up at the front, there's an altar here, and there is underneath a place where you kneel. And this is the Star of Bethlehem, and you kneel down underneath it, and you place your hands inside the star. You touch the ground. It's got kind of a black paraffin inside there, but you kneel and you do that. Why would you do that? Well, you might do it just because everybody's doing it, and you want your picture taken. Or you might do it because you stop and say, in this place, we believe that the Word became flesh. We believe that God came to visit this planet. That God came and was born among us like us in poverty to two poor peasants from the north who'd come to Bethlehem, Joseph's hometown, and Christ was born in this place, and that because of him, when we look at him, we understand that who God is and what God is like. And so for me, when I go in there, it's easy just to go in and kneel and do the thing and then walk out, but I want to go back and I want to just stop and I want to think about, what was that night like? I can promise you it was not a silent night. There's a girl who's 14 years old who's giving birth to her first child, and her parents aren't there, and she's terrified. And there's the sounds of animals. I want you just to close your eyes and just to imagine in that room the animals that are there, the donkeys, and if donkeys are in there, it's a first century parking garage for a homeless couple who's homeless, at least at that moment, giving birth. And I want you to be able to think, when God came to visit us, he wasn't born in a palace. He was born in a stable. And the first bed that he was laid in, the crib, of course, was a manger, which is an animal's feeding trough. Now, Luke says that 3 times that he was laid in a manger. He must be wanting to make sure we get the point that the one who we remember by eating bread and wine had as his first crib a feeding trough. He was the bread of the world. He was the one who would sustain us spiritually, who would give us life. And then to see again, to picture the humility with which God comes and dwells among us. I don't want you to miss this. Now, while you're in Bethlehem, so do that. You'll have a chance to sing, maybe, probably not in there, but maybe when you get outside to be able to sing a Christmas carol. So pick a couple of Christmas carols. If you're the bus captain or if you're one of the pastors on a particular bus, figure out which 2 carols you're going to sing, but everybody will know the first verse at least. And take the time to sing, and take the time to pray when you're there. And then you'll visit the Catholic church, which is right next to it, a newer church that is built on the Catholic portion of these caves. All right, so don't miss that. Now, after that, you're also, as you're driving through Bethlehem, as you're getting ready to leave, you're going to see a large wall in Bethlehem. And this ties into the fact that there's conflict going on in Bethlehem today. And so Bethlehem is in the West Bank territories, and the people who live there are Palestinians. Some are Muslims, some are Christians. The largest Christian population has historically been in Bethlehem. And as you may remember, so this is the security wall that's built around Bethlehem, and you can see it here, and you can see it winds all the way around the city, and there are guard towers with, here's another one right here. Some have guards in them, and some don't have guards in them. But you may remember that, or maybe you don't know, that the Palestinians have lived in this land for a very long time. If you talk to them, most of them will tell you they can take you back 500 years, 1,000 years. This is where their family's been from. Most of the Jews who live in the Holy Land have moved there in the last 70 years or so. So there are Jews who've lived there for a very long time. It was historically the place that the Jews called home, but the Palestinians said, wait a minute, because the British and the United Nations, you took our land from us, and you've told us where we can live, and the conflict emerges from that. And if you actually take the time to listen to people's stories, you may not have time to do that here, but you're going to hear, a part of the story you maybe haven't heard much of before in the news. And so you have Palestinians who have taken up arms, and at one point in particular during one of the previous intifadas began to detonate bombs in places. And the Israelis have said, we have to have safety. And the only way we can have that is if we build a security wall to keep us safe. And so if you're on one side of the security wall and you feel like your historic lands have been taken from you, it feels one way. And if you're on the other side of the wall, nobody wants the wall, but if you're on the other side, it's what's protecting you. And so one of the things that at least the groups that I have been with does is we go and we stand at the wall and we pray for peace for people on both sides. And because nobody can quite figure out the solution to this, we do pray that God will guide and direct in ways that we haven't seen up to this point. But I want you to imagine if you're living on one side of this wall, what it feels like. This is one of our church groups who is praying at the wall. All right, I want to show you a couple things you aren't going to see, because this is a trip that is a taster trip. You simply have 3 days. You're not going to be able to experience everything there is to experience there. So I want to show you a couple things that happen in the life of Jesus after this. So Jesus returns to the Galilee. Actually, he has to escape. You remember King Herod the Great wants to kill. When he hears there's a baby that's been born who might be the Messiah, he commands that his soldiers kill all the children 2 years or younger in the area around Bethlehem. He does that because he's paranoid and he's a megalomaniac. And it's consistent with what Herod has done previously. He kills his favorite wife, Mariamne. He kills 2 of his sons because he's afraid they're going to usurp his power and take over power. So it's not surprising that he would say, let's kill all the children who might be a threat to my power. And he's near the end of his life. And so the Holy Family flees, and they flee to Egypt, and they become refugees in Egypt. And they live there, we don't know how long, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. There are churches in Cairo that will purport to be places where they stayed. But they stay there for some period of time until Herod dies, and then they make their way back up to the north, to the Galilee, to Nazareth, which you may have on your map. All right, so Jesus spends most of his time in Nazareth. He grows up in Nazareth. He stays there. His father was what? What did his father do for a living? He was a carpenter. What did that mean? Yeah, he was, there's another word for stonemason. So tekton is the word that's used for carpenter. And at that time, it could be used for stonemason, but there's another word that's used. Typically, this was somebody who was a handyman. They built furniture, they built tables, they built maybe shutters or doors, and they built farm implements. And so he was a handyman. If you were a master tekton, you were an architecton, which is where we get the term architect. But if you were just a tekton, you were a pretty humble person in that community. And that was Joseph. He was a tekton, not an architecton, but a tekton. And Jesus learned the trade from him. So he was the son of a carpenter. He learned how to be a carpenter, but he also learned a lot more than that. And he, of course, had a deep love for God, his Father, from the time that he was, well, as long as he could understand, as soon as he understood. There are some people who think that when Jesus was born, he had a full awareness that he was the Son of God. No, he was a baby. Paul says he humbled himself. God humbled himself and took on flesh. And so he had to learn to walk and talk, and he had to learn all the things children learn. And along the way, he's growing in his awareness of who he is and of his Father. All right, so Jesus then, at the age of 30, his cousin John the Baptist is baptizing down by the Jordan, at the Jordan River, near the Dead Sea. I just wanted you to see, this is what the Jordan River looks like near the Dead Sea. And it's a lot smaller than most of us think. It's probably, this doesn't show a great sense of dimensions, but it's probably about 50 feet across at the place where Jesus was baptized, or baptized near this place. We stop and we remember our baptisms there. People. So if you come back again, and we're hoping that you might say, I want to come back again, you can stand on the steps. Across the river are the Jordanian military, and on the other side is the Israeli military. And you can take off your shoes and just step in the water, and somebody can take water and make the sign of the cross and remember your baptism. But if you really want to experience a renewal of your baptism, you might want to rent the robe, and you get a robe and you get a towel for $10, and we take you in the water. And when you step in, you can feel there's wood, and then there's places where you can actually feel the mud just oozing up between your feet, between your toes. And I just really love that because, again, once more, you're experiencing what Jesus experienced, what the disciples experienced when they were being immersed. So this is the last time we were here immersing folks in the water. This is in February, and the water was about 68 degrees, and the temperature outside was about 70 degrees, and it was a little chilly. This is the group that we had who were being immersed. You can see those in the robes over here. Oops. Over here, you can see Jordan. And over here, you're in Israel. And you can see how small this is. And it's probably a little different from the way you imagine the Jordan River. All right, Jesus then leaves and he goes to the wilderness. And he prays for 40 days and 40 nights. And we often think of the wilderness as a tree, dense forest. This is the Judean wilderness. And this is a beautiful area. This is a monastery. I think it's St. George's Monastery. And this area is sometimes called the Valley of the Shadow, when we think of the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And I love this imagery. Somebody pointed out it looks like Christ in this image with his arms outstretched, overlooking the valley. Anyway, it's quite a beautiful place. And hopefully one day you'll have a chance to go and visit the wilderness of Judea as well. I don't think that's built into our trip this time around, but at some point you'll have a chance to do that. All right, so now I want to take you to Capernaum. This is where we're going to go for the first day. And we're going to be landing here at the port of Haifa. We're going to travel. It's going to take, by the time you get through customs and they get to Capernaum, it'll be an hour and a half to 2 hours. You're fortunate that we get to be the first ones off the bus, which is going to save us about an hour of waiting. Jesus grew up here, but this is where we're going to Capernaum, and I think I've got a closer shot. So here's Capernaum here. We're going to visit there. We're going to visit Tabgha, which is right over here, and we're going to visit the Mount of Beatitudes, which is along the seacoast as well. The Jordan River flows into this area here, and it flows out down here. And the Sea of Galilee is about 8 miles across at its widest and 13 miles across north and south, and it's about 150 feet deep. Jesus loved the water. So when Jesus left his home, he went and he preached in Nazareth, his first message in his hometown, and then he leaves Nazareth and he's rejected there, and he goes to Capernaum, and he makes that his home base for 3 years of his public ministry. And that tells me that Jesus loved the water. 50 times the Sea of Galilee is mentioned in the Gospels. 50 times boats are mentioned in the Gospels. So Jesus not only liked the lake, but he also liked the boats. And he went across, these are not gambling boats, these are fishing boats. And he goes across the Sea of Galilee again and again and again in his ministry. All right, so when it comes to Capernaum, you're going to be visiting Capernaum. I'm going to show you some pictures of Capernaum here in a second. Actually, let me go ahead and show this to you now. So this is Capernaum, at least what's been excavated of Capernaum. And you can see the seashore on the other side. Jesus is walking along the seashore and he's preaching, and he calls his disciples. I want you to notice two things. There's a modern building here, an octagon, that is a Catholic church built over something that was a very important historic site there. And then you'll see the synagogue. And this synagogue was built in the 300s on top of the synagogue from Jesus' time. And then all of these are homes in here and part of the village. So I want us to take a look at this building right here. So this is what it looked like before the Catholic church was built on top of it. You can see the Sea of Galilee in the background. It was originally a house. You're going to have a chance to see this because the church has a glass floor to look down inside it. You're going to walk alongside it as well. But there was a house that was in here, and you can find the remains of that house, at least what's left of that house. And that house belonged to somebody important enough to build a church on top of it. That house was converted into a house church. After it was a house church, it was expanded to become a larger church, and then a larger church. It was formed, the church architecture was formed as an octagon, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But you think about, okay, whose house was in Capernaum that was so important that you'd build a church on top of it? That actually converted into a church very early on. And it would be Simon and Andrew's house, with Simon's wife and his mother-in-law. And Matthew 4:13 tells us that Jesus made that his home for the 3 years of his public ministry. What I love about Capernaum, to me, it's one of the holiest places there, because when you walk through Capernaum, there is no doubt you are walking where Jesus walked. Wherever you're walking in that village, he walked there. He was there over a 3-year period of time, no matter where you're at. When you walk along the seashore there, you want to just pause and maybe open up your Bible if you've got your Bible with you and take the time to read some of the stories of what happens at the seashore of the Sea of Galilee. When you're in the synagogue, I want you to pause and I want you to remember this. So here again, this is what it looked like, 40 years ago. But the Catholic, or the church was here, where Simon and Andrew's home was, which is right inside here. And the synagogue was right here. It's not even 100 yards between the two. And for years they coexisted side by side. So this is inside the synagogue, and you'll find that there are benches that you can come and sit in. This built into the, what was part of the synagogue. And you find where the teaching seat of Moses was somewhere in this vicinity up here. And you have a chance to experience and to pause and to think about these stories. So let me read a couple of them to you briefly. So I'd like to share with you, first of all, this is from Mark chapter 1. And I have lost a page here. Oh, there it is, okay. So in Mark chapter 1, I want you to notice this. Actually, I'll just read it from my scriptures. Starting in verse 20. So Mark 1, beginning in verse 20. I think that's in the New Testament. Yeah, Mark's in the New Testament. Just kidding. All right. So we read these words, actually starting in verse 14. After John was put in prison, Jesus went into Galilee, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God, or the good news of God. The time has come, the kingdom of God is near, repent and believe the good news. As Jesus walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of people. And once they left their nets and followed him. The same happened with James and John. they went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue. So you're going to be in that place where this happened. Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching, and because he taught them as one who had authority, not as one of the teachers of the law. Just then a man in the synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." And the evil spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. And the people were all amazed. They asked each other, "What is this, a new teaching and with authority? He even gives order to the evil spirits, and they obey him." And and news about him spread over the whole region. Look down at verse 29. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the house of Simon and Andrew. You're going to be going there. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told Jesus about her. And so he went to her and took her hand and helped her up, and the fever left her instantly. That evening, sunset came, and Jesus cast out demons. The people brought the sick and the demon-possessed, and he cast out the demons, and he healed the sick. And so you continued, chapter 2, verse 1. A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. So many gathered there. There was no room left. There was no room left for anyone to get inside the house. Whose house is he in? Probably Simon and Andrew's. All right. So some men came bringing to him a paralytic, carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get to him because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above, and after digging through it, lowered the mat with the paralyzed man lying on it. Jesus saw their faith, and he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven you." I mean, these are all stories that are happening right where you're going to be. All right, so anyway, here's what I want you to be able to do. When you're there in Capernaum, I want you to stop and read some of these stories. Bus captains, pastors who are with your crew, I want you to be able to look up some of the stories in Capernaum. I want you to be able to read them there. Go by the seashore. Remember what Jesus called his disciples to do. When you stop there and you look at the lake, I want you to remember, Jesus called me too. He called me to follow him and to take the time. And you might want to sing. If you've got a song you want to sing there, that's great. But take the time to be able to just engage in the moment. Look around at the water. Think about it. Remember what happens here. And invite Christ into your life once more. Choose to follow him once again in your life. I want you to think about when you're inside the synagogue, how many times he cast out demons and healed the sick who were there. And when he cast out the demons, I love these stories because it shows that Christ had more power than the darkness, more power than evil or hate or anything else. Christ defeated these things in front of everyone else. And I love the fact that in the Gospels, when somebody is demon-possessed or somebody's struggling, whether it's mental illness or some kind of demonic possession, when Jesus tells the demons to leave, they have to leave. They have to obey him. He has that kind of power. All right, so when we leave Capernaum, we're going to go to Tabgha. So let me just show you a couple other places here. We're going to go to Tabgha, which is right over here, and this is the place where after Jesus, so it may be where the fish and the loaves were multiplied. That's one tradition. But another tradition is that this is where, after his resurrection, Jesus sat waiting for his disciples who were fishing, and they didn't realize he was on the shoreline. And he's cooking bread and fish. And you're going to find there's a chapel there that marks this. And you remember Simon Peter denied Jesus 3 times? Jesus is going to personally engage Simon Peter. And John tells us that he was cooking over a charcoal fire, and there was a charcoal fire when Simon denied Jesus 3 times at the night that Jesus was arrested. So Simon Peter comes over, and Jesus says to him, "Simon, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Simon, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Simon, do you love me? Feed my lambs." So this is the little chapel that this little rock outcropping was said to be the table of Christ, where he was preparing this meal for his disciples. Some of these things we can say, was it really that? Did it really happen there? I don't know. But it's a great place to remember the story. So you're going to see the statue there, Christ reinstating Simon Peter. So when you get to the statue, I want you to be able to stop, and I want you to think, have I ever denied Jesus? Is there anything I ever said or did that was a denial of Jesus? And then to pause and to be able to pray. And Lord, I know, like Simon Peter, you'll forgive me, and you do forgive me. But please wash me clean and make me new. I'm so sorry for the ways that I have denied you, and the way I live, the way I speak, the things that I've done, or the things that I didn't do that I should have done. And so I want you to pause in these places and remember this. This is one of the things I'd like to invite you to do. This is the chapel here, the Mensa Christi Chapel. And this group I had earlier this year, and I asked them just to take off their shoes and socks and to put their feet in the water. And to remember Jesus walking on the water. To remember that Jesus was in a boat and calmed the wind and the waves while he was in the boat. I want them to remember that the disciples were in that water when he called them to follow him. And I'd love for you, you don't have to sit down if your hip bones or knee bones are not very good. Just take off your shoes and socks and walk in the water a little bit. I want you just to feel it on your feet. And I want you to remember all the things that happened at the Sea of Galilee. I'm inviting you to make this more than just an opportunity to do sightseeing, but to actually experience these things in the ministry of Christ. All right, I want to take you, so here's the Sea of Galilee again. Another view at sunset. These boats are out there on the water. You won't have time to take one across the water, but if you go back to Israel again, you'll have a chance to do this in the future. All right. I want to pause, and I'm going to ask you to turn to a couple of other people and just say, or one other person, what are you looking forward to experiencing when you go to Capernaum? Okay? So based on what you've heard, is there anything, any stories that come to mind or anything that you hope to experience when you go to the place where Jesus walked in Galilee? You've got 1 minute.
So we kind of had on the way to what we wanted. I feel like I need to worship online.
All right, let's go to Jerusalem. So we are going to be making this trek from Capernaum. We're going to actually get back to the boat. We're going to make the trek down to Ashdod. And from Ashdod, we'll be traveling to Bethlehem and to Jerusalem. We will, and to Bethlehem. So you're going to, half of you will go to Jerusalem on the first day, half of you will go to Bethlehem on the first day, and you'll swap. You can see this is where Gaza is, actually just a little bit south of that. And this is why there's concerns today, and we'll find out what's actually going to be happening with our trip in a bit, or sometime today. But I want to remind you, Jesus and his disciples would have come down to Jerusalem. They would have tried to come down the route of the patriarchs, down through the heart of the country. They ended up actually somewhere around here. The Samaritans did not want to allow them to pass. They ended up coming back over this way, which is how most Jews passed through and around Samaria, and they came across at Jericho to Jerusalem. And so this is what we will be taking the boat around, but this is what you normally do. Our groups typically go right through the heart of the West Bank. We stop and we remember the story of the woman at the well in this area over here. But a lot of groups come around across the Jordan River, over and back over. That's what Jesus did. He came to Jericho, and on the last week of his life, he began that week by calling a man who was up in a sycamore tree, who was trying to catch a glimpse of Jesus, called him to come down so he could eat at his house. What was his name again? Zacchaeus. All right. Luke 19:10. When he ate dinner at Zacchaeus' house, he said to the religious leaders who were angry that he was eating with a sinner, he said, "The Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost." All right, so we're going to go to Jerusalem. And as we go to Jerusalem, this is from the Mount of Olives. And you can see the Dome of the Rock over here, the Islamic holy shrine that was built in the late 600s. But this was at one time where the temple stood. The temple originally of Solomon, later on of Zerubbabel, and then of King Herod. This is what are sometimes called the Southern Steps or the Teaching Steps. And so if you were visiting this during a regular tour of the Holy Land, you'd be over here on the Teaching Steps as well. And on the back side over here, I'll show you in a moment, is where what's sometimes called the Wailing Wall, what's more accurately called the Western Wall. What's left of the foundation wall from Herod's time of the Temple Mount, and closest to what is believed to be where the Holy of Holies was. And so the Jewish people come there to pray. All of these tombs here, they're buried in this way with their heads backwards. This is the Mount of Olives that these tombs are on, so that when the Messiah comes, the dead rise and they are facing what would be the temple in the future. You can see from here some of the places you're going to go. These two domes right here is where Calvary and Jesus' tomb was. And that's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the Kidron Valley that comes right through here. And so let's take a closer look. This is the western wall. And if you would like, you might want to bring a pen and a little piece of paper. And you're able to write down your prayer concerns if you'd like to, and you can place them in the cracks and crevices of this wall. These large stones are from the time of King Herod. Men are on one side, on the left, women are on the other side. And this, I believe, will be something you'll have an opportunity to do. The Islamic shrine, the Dome of the Rock, I just wanted you to see it. Again, built in the 600s. It was remodeled later on in the 20th century. The gold was added to the top. If you went inside, this is what you see on the inside. And interestingly enough, there is a surah inside here, a saying from the Quran that talks about Mary giving birth. It's up here in the top, actually. And then this is what you see. This is the rock formation at the top of Mount Zion. And so this is where, according to the Islamic tradition, Muhammad visited with the prophets and ascended to the heavens for a time in his night journey. But this is also where Abraham would have sought to offer Isaac in the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition. And this is where somewhere in this vicinity would have been the Holy of Holies built on top of this holy shrine. All right, we're going to start on top of the Mount of Olives, and we're going to make our way down the Mount of Olives. And this is remembering Christ on Palm Sunday. We're going to move from that. Halfway down the mountain, you stop and you look over Jerusalem. You'll have your picture taken at the top. You'll look over Jerusalem, and you'll remember that Jesus stopped and he wept over the city of Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if only you knew the things that make for peace, but you would not. And he weeps there over Jerusalem because he knows that because they will reject him as the Messiah that God has sent, the one who calls people to love your enemies, they're going to seek after a military leader. And by 66 AD, they're going to wage a war against the Romans. They're going to be utterly devastated. According to Josephus, over 1 million Jews put to death by AD 70 or 71, and the temple destroyed. You get to the bottom of the mountain, and you're going to move forward from Palm Sunday to Holy Thursday, and here you come to the Garden of Gethsemane. Some of these trees, they say, are, well, some think they would be from the time of Christ. Maybe they're the roots and the springs from trees that were from the time of Christ. This is the oldest of them back over here, where people pause and remember Christ praying in the Garden of Gethsemane before he's arrested. And what does he pray again? Father, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but thy will be done. This is the church that sits on that site. This is the Church of All Nations, or the Basilica of Christ Agony. When you go inside, it's meant to transport you back 2,000 years. I don't want you to miss it. So when you go inside here, you look up in the ceiling, there's stars up in the ceiling. You look at the columns, and they become tree branches as you're coming out into this space. You look at the front, and you see Christ kneeling in agony. Off to the side, you find him being betrayed with a kiss by Judas Iscariot. You're meant to go into that building and to be taken back to that moment, that time in history. Judas, at the very front of the space, betraying Jesus with a kiss. Jesus kneeling at this rock formation that the church has been built over as he was praying in agony to his Father, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but thy will be done. You see the rock formation at the front near the altar? And this rock formation is all that's left of what was a larger rock formation. People used to come as pilgrims and chip away parts of the rock and take it home with them. You can't do that anymore. But what you can do is you can come and kneel and pray. And once more, I don't want you to miss this. For me, this is like my favorite church in Jerusalem. And when I come down and I kneel there, I make that my prayer too. I stop and I pray, Father, not my will, but thy will be done. And if you can't get to that, maybe there's a Catholic service going on. If you go off to the corner, there's a little bit more rock formation in the corner. Most people don't look for that. You can stop and touch it and pray. You can go outside and around the corner. Part of that rock formation is there. But to stop and pray, and bus captains, lead your people to find those rock places if you can't go to the front. Not my will, but thy will be done. You're journeying with Jesus. You're adopting his prayers as he prayed these things. All right. You're going to walk through the old city of Jerusalem. I don't know that we have crosses for the folks on these buses, and this time around we don't. But typically on a full-length cruise where we have more time, or trip, you'll be carrying crosses through the stations of the cross, 12 stations of the cross, recounting Christ's journey through Jerusalem, carrying his own cross, according to several of the Gospels. And so you'll walk through the streets. You'll come to, this is one of the stations of the cross. This is where we remember, you'll go into a little chapel and you'll remember that Christ is beaten by the Roman lictors. And so you'll see a crown of thorns in the ceiling of the church.
and take it in. Just pause there. Look at the stained glass windows. They're telling the story of what's happening as Barabbas is being released and Jesus is being condemned to die. You're going to come to this church. This is the holiest shrine in Christianity. It is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So it's actually two churches in one. Right over here, you can see the steps. You're not going to go up those stairs. You're going to go in these doors. But this takes you up. Once you're inside, you're going to go up a set of steps and you come to the top of a rock outcropping here, which is said to be the place where Christ and two thieves were crucified on that day. So you're going to stop and you're going to remember Christ's crucifixion at the top. I'll show you more about that in a moment. You'll come back down another set of steps and you come past what's called the Stone of Unction inside. And this is not the Stone of Unction. It was found years later. But it is where you stop and remember his body was prepared for burial. And then you come over here and you come into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the place where Christ was buried. So again, this is the entryway you're going to go in. This is where Calvary is, right over here. This is where the tomb of Christ was. I want you to see this. This is how the church was built originally. This is a large rock outcropping over here. This was probably a rock quarry. Christ crucified here. This is all that's left of that rock formation, but you can see where it was. Over here, a tomb that had been carved into the rock. And so this area here is the sepulcher. It was carved out of rock. It was destroyed and rebuilt. But this is thought to be where Christ's tomb actually was. It has a pretty high likelihood of being in this vicinity based upon when Christians began to visit there to remember the death of Christ. When you come up those steps to Calvary, so the rock formation is over here. You can see how busy it is, how crowded it is. Take in all of the tile mosaics around you. Christ being nailed to the cross, his mother here, Mary Magdalene here, and you can see the Roman lictor who's preparing to nail his body or has just nailed his body to the cross. You're going to make your way into this space. I want you to be really pleasant as Christians, and I want you to be firm. Because there are a lot of people who are trying to squeeze in there, and if you just stand back, you'll be there for hours. You'll never get inside. So you just make sure you keep your space, and you just keep moving forward, and don't elbow or hurt anybody, but just keep moving forward so you actually have a chance to get in there. It will be very crowded, I believe, during this time. So let me show you what you're going to see once you get in there. You can see this rock formation, the rock that's underneath the glass here on either side, and there's rock underneath here as well. This is the altar. There were two thieves on either side of the cross being crucified. This is thought to be the place where Christ was crucified. Was it exactly in that place, or was it 5 yards one direction or another? I don't know. But this is what we remember here. And so this is where you come. You'll have a chance to kneel, and inside there is a circular object, and you place your hand down in it, and if you can stretch far enough, you get to touch the top of the rock. Why is that important? It probably isn't important except to say, this really happened. Our Savior was crucified. Jesus was crucified, and somewhere in this vicinity, and it just anchors that story when you do that. Don't feel like you have to do it. If your knees are not good, don't do it. You're going to have about 3 seconds. That's why I want you to be prepared when you go in. To just be able to go, okay, and that whole waiting in line is preparation time for you. To go, I'm remembering what wondrous love is this as Christ was crucified. I'm remembering what he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or how he cried out, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Or how he said, it is finished, or I'm thirsty, or all the other things that Jesus said in the last phrases from the cross. You're going to have a chance to remember all of that. This shows you what it's like when somebody's kneeling down and placing their hand inside of it. There's one more person with their hand going down inside. You got to really reach down in there. You won't touch the stone otherwise. As you come down the steps are right over here. So Calvary is up this way. You come down the stairs right over, just off screen. And you come to the Stone of Unction, and you'll see a lot of people taking handkerchiefs and wiping them there. It's very superstitious for a lot of people, thinking if I just touch my handkerchief there, something's going to happen. But what I want you to notice is this mural back over here. Christ is crucified on Calvary. He's prepared for burial here at the Stone of Unction. That's just telling the story. And then he's buried over here in a tomb. When you go into the tomb, this is very early in the morning. It doesn't look like this. It's going to have lines wrapped around it 2 or 3 times. I'm sorry. You will not have time to go inside this space. So I'm going to show you what's in there. So as you look in the door, you're going to find inside this glass case, it's a very small space, only 2 or 3 people can fit in at a time, what is purported to be part of what's the stone that was rolled in front of the tomb, just a small portion of that. Is it? I don't know. And then you'll go back into a smaller chamber, and you're going to see there's rock. So you can tell it was actually part of the rock formation. You'll see part of it that was preserved. And then you'll see a bench, and under that bench was said to be the place where Christ was buried. So I thought I'd show you one last thing, and that is what burials looked like in the first century. So this is on the Mount of Olives, or actually it's by Hebrew University. I can't remember the name of it, Mount Scopus. And this was a rock, this all was rock on top of this at one point. It caved in. You'll see these niches. So I'll tell you about that more in just a moment, but the body would have been laid here. And when you read the stories about Christ and the angels were sitting, or two people dressed in white were sitting on either end where his body had lain, this is where the bodies were laid. After about a year or more of decomposition, somebody came back in, gathered the bones, washed them, put them in a box called an ossuary, a bone box. And they were put into these niches here. So this isn't where people were buried. Their boxes with the bones were placed in these areas here. This is one last image. This is on Mount Scopus as well, and you can see the bone boxes. They were placed back in these niches back over here, and this is what burials look like. The bodies were laid here first, decomposed. Just to give you some ideas what's happening. Kevin, I wanted to include that picture with your dad. So Kevin's father passed away in the last year, but they were on a trip together, and I had that picture in my mind. I wanted to share that with Kevin and his family, or with Kevin and all of you. Okay, I want to wrap this up. And I want to wrap it up by saying all of that is interesting in preparation. What does all of this mean? So the Gospels and the early church were trying to help people understand, what does this mean? Who was this man? When you're reading the Gospel of Mark, and I hope you've already started, Mark's trying to answer 3 questions. Who is this man? What does he tell us about God? And what does he tell us about God's will for our lives? Every chapter of the Gospel of Mark is trying to tell us that. Every chapter in all of the Gospels are trying to tell us that. Paul is trying to tell us that. The book of Acts is trying to tell us that. Who is this man, and what does he teach us about God's will? I want to take you back to Bethlehem and just remind you that when John tells the story at Christmas, he doesn't tell us with angels and shepherds and wise men. This is what he says: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. The word, ha logos, from which we have the word ology. So theology, biology, zoology, psychology. That is wisdom or knowledge about bio, about life, zoology, or about psychology, the soul, or theology about God. Jesus was the wisdom of God, according to John, according to Christians, the wisdom of God, the message of God wrapped in human flesh. When we look at Jesus, he says, you've seen what the Father is like. He came to show us who God is, and that God is, and what God is like. And so everything we see about Jesus, we come to understand he's teaching us something about who God is. So I want to end with this. I remember years ago I was visiting with a rabbi friend of mine, Amy Katz. And Amy said, Adam, when I was interviewing her about the Passover, I said, Amy, tell me what the Passover means. And some of you have seen this in one of my videos in one of the books. And Amy says, Adam, for a Jew, you have to get the Passover, because the Passover is our defining story. It's the story of how we were slaves in Egypt and God liberated us, and we sacrificed a lamb, and the blood of the lamb caused the angel of death, the plague, to pass over us. And so we were spared from death, and we were liberated from slavery on that one night. You have to get the story if you're a Jew, because it is our defining story. And I want you to understand that for Christians, Jesus is our defining story. He defines who God is and what God's will is for our lives. And everything we read in the Gospels is intending to teach us something about God. When he was born in a cave in Bethlehem, it's teaching us among the poor, it's teaching us that God comes in humility to us. When he invites the night shift shepherds to come and to bear witness to the fact that the Son of God has been born, he's telling us something about his heart for people who are lowly. When Jesus cares for the sick, the broken, it tells us something about his compassion. When he cares for the people who are outcasts and outlaws and outsiders, it tells us something about the heart and character of God. Jesus doesn't condemn the sinners. You don't find that in the Gospels. He's always trying to reach out to them. The people he condemns are the religious people who are critical of the sinners, right? He's always speaking against the people who are religious hypocrites, but speaking for and on behalf of the poor and the marginalized and the nobodies. And he's saying, you belong to God and God loves you. In his cross, in his death, We look at him on the cross, and as he hangs there, Christians, there's about 7 different ways of understanding what Jesus' death on the cross means, found throughout the New Testament. But we look at it, we at least understand this, that in the cross, which Jesus freely chose to go to Jerusalem to be crucified, he understood that he was saying to the rest of the world, to us, this is how much I love you. I tell my granddaughter sometimes, Stella, I love you so much that if you had a bad heart, I would give you mine. I mean, you've felt that before towards people. I would die freely for you. I love you that much. But on the cross, God is saying, this is how much I love you. I love you this much. I would do anything to save you. On the cross, we find God is saying, no matter how bad you've been, what you've done, no matter how far away you've run from me, I want you back. I'll redeem you and save you. Jesus offers himself as a sacrifice. He offers himself as an atonement to God the Father, saying, look, I give myself to you on behalf of all these people. On the cross, we see a picture of how far we are from God, but how far God is willing to go to bring us to him, and so much more. And when we look at Christ's resurrection, here's what we see. That no matter how dark things may be, the darkness doesn't have the final word. That no matter how bleak things may feel in our lives, the bleakness doesn't have the final word. Cancer and sin and hate and death don't have the final word. In Jesus' death and resurrection, God was saying this, at least this, is the darkness in this world will not have the final word. The life and resurrection and hope have the final word. Love conquers hate. Life conquers death. Light conquers the darkness in Jesus' death and resurrection. That's the defining story of my life. Every morning I wake up next to my bed in my bedroom here, barely fitting next to the bed, on my knees to say, once more today, Jesus, I want to follow you. You are the defining story of my life. I've got multiple defining stories, my parents, and what life was like as a kid growing up, and being married to Levon, and the career that I have as a pastor, and my children and my granddaughter. But the primary defining story that I chose was to follow Jesus. To say, I want to be the person you want me to be. I want to live the way you want me to live. I belong to you. I was 14 years old and an atheist when I decided I wanted to follow Jesus after reading the Gospel of Luke. I got down on my knees that night, and I said, Jesus, I want to follow you. I'm just a kid. I'm just 14 years old. If you can do anything with me, I hope you will. But I want to follow you. And I prayed that prayer every morning since then. Once more, Lord, I'm 59. I hope you can do something with me, but I'm going to offer my life to you. And every day, the lens through which I see the world is the lens of the teachings of Jesus and the things that he did. He is my defining story. And my hope is that while you're in the Holy Land, experiencing and exploring Capernaum and Bethlehem and Jerusalem, you have a chance to see Jesus with new eyes and to invite him to be your defining story. All right, I want to pray for us right now. I'd like to invite you to put your hands out like this. And I'd like to invite you to whisper to God this prayer. God, thank you for everything. Thank you for coming to us in Jesus to show us the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus, be for me the good shepherd. And help me to follow as one of your lambs. I offer my life to you. Be my defining story. And now hear me as I pray the prayer that you taught your disciples, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. All right, Paul is going to come up and share with us some directions for what's going to be happening in the next couple of days. And we are going to be hoping and praying that things work out for us to be in Israel, but we're also going to be aware that we want to keep you safe. So, Paul, come share with us what we got.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, so I know all of us have cell phones, right? We are hearing news, we're seeing news. What I can tell you at this moment is we don't know anything. And so we are going at this moment on the assumption that we are progressing as planned. Should that change throughout the course of the day, we will notify you. The way we will go about doing that is by a voicemail on your phone in your cabin, okay? That's the best way that we know we can reach each and every one of you and make sure you get updates. Right now, just know that we are well aware of the situation, and as Adam said, Right, for those of you who don't know and haven't had any of the news broadcasts, there is some situations going on in Israel. There have been some rockets fired from Gaza. That is not unusual, but we don't know how severe yet. We don't know exactly what the story is, and we are getting updates directly from Israel as well as hearing from the people that we have on the ground there. James has been in constant contact this morning and will continue to do that throughout the day. So should our plans change, should anything change, we will keep you aware. Our number one concern is the safety of our guests. So know with anything that goes on, we'll make whatever adjustments that we need to make for that to happen, right? Because we're going to keep you guys safe. So for the rest of today, you don't have anything else on your agenda. Enjoy the ship. Get out and